Good afternoon to our viewers in Europe and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol and I'm the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. In September, voters took to the polls to elect their state parliaments in 3 Eastern German states in Brandenburg, Saxony, and Thuringia. In all 3 elections, the 3 parties that make up the Ampelkoalition, the leading government in Berlin, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats, came away weakened. The far-right alternative for Germany, the AfD, and the new left-wing Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, or BSW, gained traction in all 3 states. Based on the results, some have argued that the democratic center of Germany's party system is eroding, while political fringes are getting stronger. Even the main opposition party, the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, did not perform very well. State governments have still not formed, but we'll gain some insights on that in our conversation today, because to help us understand the significance of the 3 elections in Eastern Germany, and to share some insights ahead of the federal elections early next year, I'm delighted to welcome award-winning German journalist Sabine Schicketanz as part of our Superwahljahr 2024 series. Sabine has been reporting for the Potsdamer Neueste Nachrichten for more than 20 years, and in 2024, she became the editor-in-chief. Sabine Schicketanz, herzlich willkommen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the Kaffeepause. Thank you.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And before we dive in, I just want to set the stage a little bit more so that everybody is aware of what we're talking about. September was a big month in terms of state elections in the East. On September 1st, voters took to the polls in Saxony and Thuringia, and on September 22nd, voters in Brandenburg, just outside of Berlin, where you're based in Potsdam, took to the polls. The right-wing populist party, the AfD, handily won the election in Thuringia with a 9% lead over the Christian Democrats. The minister-president of Thuringia, Bodo Ramelow, he represents the left party, and they lost a stunning 17.9% of the vote. In Saxony, the AfD came close to overtaking the Christian Democrats, where it won 40 out of the 120 seats in the Landtag, and the AfD also did well in Brandenburg. Although the SPD barely met the 5% threshold in Saxony and Thuringia, it did come in as the strongest party in Brandenburg with over 30% of the vote. The newcomer on the scene, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, which was founded earlier this year, did well in all 3 states as well. But that came at the expense of the left party, but also the Greens and the Free Democrats, who did not do well in any of these elections. Sabine, as you sort of reflect on these 3 elections, which results surprised you the most?
The most surprised me that the AfD was so strong amongst the young voters, actually. We had very strong numbers for the AfD the whole time. For many months, almost 2 years, AfD was the front runner, for example, in Brandenburg, also in Saxony and Thuringia. They were strong, but what I did not expect was that they would be as strong with the young ones in between 16 and 34. In Brandenburg, the AfD was by far the strongest party, and that was actually a surprise to us.
I mean, I think one of the reports that I had seen was that voters under the age of 30 had I guess they won by a margin of 20% in that age group. I mean, it was really significant how many young people came out to vote for the AFD. As the dust has settled on those elections a little bit, has there been any sort of assessment about why so many young people voted that way? One of the things that I had read was that one should not think of this purely as a protest vote, but rather that people were voting for the AFD and, for that matter, for BSW out of conviction, not just as sort of a protest against the status quo of the Ampel at the federal level or even the state government.
To me, there might be, or that was in discussion here too, there might be two reasons. One reason is that the AFD is not seen by many as a far right or even right-wing party. The AfD is nearing to be like a people's party already, especially in the East. So the consciousness, what they were giving their vote to, was not as big as we might think. That was one reason that young people turned to AfD a lot. And the other topic is migration. That is not only for young voters, has been the most important topic, but especially for the young ones, it turns out that after having the pandemic here and the war in Ukraine, there's a very strong sense of, or a very strong need for security. And the AfD has managed to set their set the tone, I would say, in that debate we had, and had managed to address young people the strongest with these topics.
So we can come back to some of the other parties in just a moment, but let's maybe look a little bit more closely at what happened in each of the states. Let's perhaps start with Thuringia, where the AFD won over 32% of the vote, almost 33% of the vote. And this despite the fact that Bodo Ramelow, the previous minister-president, was incredibly popular and well-received, but his party, the Linkspartei, barely won 13% of the vote and had quite a precipitous drop over previous years. The CDU, the Christian Democrats, came in as the second strongest party with just over 23% of the vote, but the Social Democrats dropped to only 6% of the vote. And the Greens and the Free Democrats didn't even make it beyond the 5% hurdle. This was quite a shakeup. And certainly in the days after the election, there was real surprise that the AFD came in as the strongest party. Fast forward to today, and it looks as if the government in Thuringia is closest to coming together after the election. The Christian Democrats have partnered with the Social Democrats and with the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht to put together a coalition agreement, which is actually supposed to be released tomorrow already. But I think it would be really interesting to hear from you about some of the dynamics in the state leading up to the election and after the election, and then we can talk about the jockeying to put together a coalition over the last couple of months.
Yes, it took 11 weeks actually of negotiations. If you know that, you can probably figure what kind of really surprising and really polarizing party systems we have now in the state. Nobody really could think before that Bodo Ramelow would be the biggest loser because, as you said, he was very popular, and actually people, like compared to Brandenburg, we have a very strong minister president here too, which Dietmar Woidke, he was successful, but Ramelow didn't succeed. Part of the reason for that is the BSW, who took votes from Die Linke, which was the strongest, which had that result in Thuringia. First, they tried to form a government after the election that would have a majority, because CDU and SPD and BSW now, that will now probably form the government, they will not have a majority. They lack like 10 seats, so they will always be, they will always have to rely on the other parties to even govern the state. What political experts now describe for Thuringia is that you can there see, as well as I would say nowhere else in Germany, that the strong AfD and the strong BSW are making the party system in Germany highly dysfunctional. You can see it is not working anymore, really, or it's taking a very long time, and it's taking parties together that actually do not have so much in common just to be able to form a government. I would say there will still be a lot of issues in between the three parties now in talks, or almost succeeding the talks, that that we will have policy issues they will not be very close on, and that will have a lot of implications on the future of the state, actually.
I think that that's a story, as we get into it, that can be told in the other states as well, but also one that we've seen at the federal level, and that we're likely to see at the federal level too, when you have three parties that have such disparate views on things. It's very hard for them to find a common position. And, you know, so that's, I think, one of the things of concern about the Christian Democrats teaming up together with Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht and with the SPD to form this government. Have you, I mean, obviously the coalition agreement has not been made public yet. That's supposed to come out tomorrow, but do you have any insights into what some of the topics are that this new coalition would try to address? I've often been impressed by coalition agreements because it's sort of like an Arbeitsplan. It's a work plan for the incoming government of here's what we want to achieve, and here's where we've established common ground with our coalition partners. Do you have a sense of what the top issues are for the hopefully new government in Thuringia?
Well, the topic everybody will look at, and actually all the state policy topics are not very important, but everybody will look at as we say here a lot, the peace policy issues. It's how to deal with war war against Ukraine, because that is the biggest topic of BSW in the whole country, I would say, but especially in the East. And here it will be very interesting to see how strong will the BSW and how strong will Sarah Wagenknecht be in making her points in this coalition paper. So we had a little taste of it just yesterday here in Brandenburg, where I'm jumping ahead a little, but here in Brandenburg, SPD and BSW are negotiating the coalition right now, and we here one paper leaked yesterday to us.
Mhm.
So we got to know that they were actually the BSW here is trying to establish or re-establish gas from Russia to Brandenburg, and is opposing any war industry, more support for war industry in the state of Brandenburg. So there you get a taste of what might be in this coalition paper, and it will be very interesting to see how far the BSW could push CDU and SPD on that track, because it is opposing government policy in Germany, what BSW is doing in the Ukraine question.
I mean, let me pick up right there, and then we can go on and talk a little bit more about Brandenburg. But there had been some discussion from BSW saying that they had a red line, that they would only join coalitions even at the state level if their coalition partners said that they would not continue to provide support to Ukraine, military support, and yet, in both cases that you described, in Thuringia with BSW going into a coalition with the Christian Democrats in the lead, going into a coalition in Brandenburg with the Social Democrats in the lead. These are both parties that have not said that they will pull back their support of Ukraine at the federal level. How has that sort of debate played out at the state and local level?
It was a very important debate because the BSW got for the first, or as a new party, completely new party in all three eastern states, BSW was double digit or finished double digit in all three of them. So there's a strong vote for that topic, because that was the main topic in the months before the election for BSW. And there is a different, I would say, a different view maybe on Russia still in East Germany. So it was what SPD and CDU had to acknowledge in Thuringia, but also in the two other states, is that there is a need or there is a vote to address that topic. I would say in none of the three states there will be the outcome that the other parties will say we will not support Ukraine anymore. That will not happen. But they will have to find a way, or they will have to move, and they will have to find some way to deal with the Ukraine question. And I would say it's Brandenburg might be a good example for how to do it, because they said they will focus on diplomatic efforts to end the war, which is actually not a topic for state in Germany. It's a federal state, but not for the states, but they have to do it that way. So that way they could come together. But it has been a very important topic.
So, I mean, you've talked a little bit about Brandenburg in the course of our conversation, and just as a reminder, the Social Democrats won in Brandenburg with 30.9% of the vote, but that was quickly followed by the AfD with 29.2% of the vote. The next largest party was the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht with 13.5%. Of course, they had not been represented previously. The Christian Democrats passed the 5% hurdle comfortably with 12% of the vote, but still in a weakened position. And again, the Greens, the Free Democrats, the Left Party, the Freie Wähler, these were all parties that did not make it beyond the 5%. You spoke briefly about Dietmar Woidke. He's the minister president of Saxony. And in some of the media reports that I was reading, people were writing that he and the Social Democrats won in spite of Olaf Scholz and leadership at the national level by the Social Democrats, not because of it. I had heard that a number of politicians did not want to candidate with or did not want to appear at election events with the chancellor or with national politicians because they were concerned about that. And yet this sort of narrow victory by the Social Democrats was touted as a big victory by Dietmar Woidke, by Olaf Scholz. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how that played out in Brandenburg later in the month?
Dietmar Woidke won in Brandenburg with the SPD, despite people being very fed up with the Ampel, with the federal government in Berlin and Chancellor Olaf Scholz, because Dietmar Woidke put as much distance in between him and the chancellor as he could. That was one reason. And the second reason is that Woidke did a all or nothing strategy, I would say. He said, it's me or them, them being the AfD. He told the voters in Brandenburg, if the SPD and we are not the strongest, we will not be the strongest party, then I will quit. I'll be gone. I'm not going to continue if AfD turns out to be the strongest party in Brandenburg. It was a high-risk game, I would say. He was successful, but now in negotiation with BSW, you can actually see the price he's paying for that. A lot of people say that it was a very high price SPD is paying in Brandenburg politically for that success.
And with these talks that are going on between the Social Democrats and BSW, it seems as if they are also close to releasing a coalition agreement. They're a little bit further behind the coalition negotiators in Thuringia. I had read reports that it looks like that might be presented in early December, so a week or two from now, but certainly before the end of the year. You've talked a little bit about some of the issues in Brandenburg, but do you think that the situation in Brandenburg is any different from Saxony and Thuringia because of the proximity to Berlin, right? Brandenburg is the state that, like a donut, is around Berlin. There are a lot of people who work in Berlin, who live in Brandenburg, and somewhat vice versa. Do you think that Brandenburg sort of has a special story to tell?
Maybe a little, yes, because of what you have described, the geographical outstanding, or like a donut with having Berlin in the middle. But actually, considering that, AfD has still been very strong in Brandenburg. So actually, I would say there is not a lot of a difference. Adding one point, maybe the economic situation in Brandenburg is a lot better. Tesla, Elon Musk has built his factory, his European Tesla factory in Brandenburg. That and many other industries have made Brandenburg actually economically stronger than, for example, Thuringia.
So moving on to Saxony, the third party, the third state that had elections in September, the Christian Democrats had a narrow victory, although it wasn't that much lower than they had done in the previous election. They came in with 31.9% of the vote, and the AfD very close on the CDU's heels with 30.6% of the vote. Shows that they could have come in on top, but they certainly came in a very strong position in the state of Saxony. The Social Democrats only came in with 7.3%, BSW with 11.8%, and the others again in the 4 or 5% range or lower. It now looks as if the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats are in negotiations to form a minority government, because together they would only have about 44% of the vote. And the hope is that a coalition agreement would be presented by Christmas, and that this new government could form. But it doesn't seem as if it's clear yet what the contents of that coalition agreement would look like. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the situation in Saxony and how things have played out there?
Yes, Saxony has a very strong CDU leader too, Michael Kretschmer, who's very popular too. And I think that is or could play out as the most important way to success for this minority government, if he is leading it, because he is able, I would say, to again form a government. And as in Brandenburg and in Thuringia, people might have not voted for the party of their minister president, but the minister presidents themselves always get a good rating from the voters. It's not always playing out to the party, but I would say it's a little outstanding compared to other states in Germany. So Michael Kretschmer, if he will lead this minority government, they expect to conclude the talks also by Christmas. There will be a chance that Saxony will not have new elections, because that is what will happen if they are not forming a government by February. Previous to the talks in between CDU and SPD, there has been 3-party coalition talks that failed, actually, and it failed because they had disagreements on foreign policy. As I said already, the Ukraine war and BSW, the same topic in all 3 states, has in Saxony led to a fail in talks in between CDU, SPD, and BSW.
So, I mean, in all 3 states, obviously the parties on the periphery, the far right AfD, but also the far right BSW, did well. I think there were very few people who were surprised at how well the AfD did. It shocked a lot of people, but I think that going into the elections, people had a good sense that the AfD would do well. Was there surprise about BSW? Because that's a relatively new party that only appeared on the scene at the beginning of this year. And yet in all 3 states, the BSW candidates were able to win in the double digits and did quite well.
Yes, you said BSW is also a right-wing party. I think BSW is touching the far left and the far right, and it's politics. It's not like, for example, AfD in Saxony. The AfD there is like a confirmed right-wing extremist group. So that is not what BSW is. Sarah Wagenknecht, the founder of that party, is a former left politician. And what she has been saying is that she sees like a gap in German party, in the German party system, in the German politics, and that is like a realistic social party. And that's what she is trying to do, with the focus also on being a war or peace party. Here it's discussed as the war or peace question she is focusing on. We have in East Germany still a sense of, which is or which comes out of about half of the population, that East Germans are underrepresented in Germany, that their needs, their basically their lives, their past in the former GDR is not acknowledged enough, and that is where BSW has focused on in the East German states, and has obviously found support and trust that especially in East Germany, people said, oh, it cannot come, or it cannot be worse than we have it now with the Ampel coalition in Berlin. So let's try something else. And obviously, these are people that understand what are the important topics for us here in the East. So to me, it was not a surprise that BSW has been so successful in these 3 elections.
So related to that, one of our viewers just submitted a question asking whether the mismanagement of unification by the government might explain some of these trends. Of course, this year marks the 35th anniversary of the fall of the wall. Next year will mark the 35th anniversary of German unification. The Treuhandanstalt came in and privatized or eliminated a lot of businesses in Eastern Germany. And the viewer is curious whether people in the former GDR don't feel genuinely upset by the developments that took place in Eastern Germany over the last 35 years.
Yes, it is a big discussion also here in Germany, if that is the reason, should be the reason, if it's even logical to be the reason. But I think as well, BSW and also AfD have been benefiting from some kind of disconnect between the public sentiment in the East and the actual situation, which is not as bad as the sentiment is of the people. There's a lot of frustration with the federal government, and I think the most important point for people in the East, having already been through a transformation in their lives, which came with the reunification of Germany, they have the fear of being once again the victim of a transformational process. And this fear is far stronger than you have it in West Germany, of course, because that very actually disconnecting lives, that transformation they have been through, people in the West always, or still up to today, they cannot imagine what that would really mean to their lives. So you have that very strong fear in the East, and a sense of the the government, the state should do more to take care of people. That might also go back to GDR, which of course let people well, they didn't have a lot to decide. They didn't have a lot of responsibility to take themselves. And many, or not, maybe not many, but at least the polls and always say it's about half of the population in the East still expects that from their government and their state. And then you have an Ampel coalition and you have a crisis, multiple crises, and they have to be disappointed. So that fear, the disappointment, being disappointed and the crisis came together, actually, I would say, to form that, a little toxic, toxic
environment.
Environment, I would say, yeah.
I mean, what I find interesting is looking at the voter participation. I mean, of course, there were times in Germany in the 50s to the 80s when voter participation in national elections was in the 80s, even 90%. But I remember not that long ago, in June of this year, for the European elections, voter turnout in Germany was the highest since reunification at just about 65% of the vote. But in these 3 state elections, 72 to 74% of the voters, eligible voters, showed up to vote. That's a pretty significant number. One can't say that people stayed away because these were just state elections. What do you read into this Wahlbeteiligung, right? This voter participation and engagement?
Yes, it has been the highest voter participation ever in, I know for sure, in Brandenburg, and I think also in Thuringia, it's been the highest we have ever seen. Thuringia was 73%. I think that was also a record number. And the sign here is we want things to change. We are finished with the Ampel coalition parties, and we want things to be a lot different. It's not only protest. I would say a lot of people said, okay, that's the East protesting with these state elections. And of course, in a lot of discussion, they played, the Ampel coalition played a role because it was always like in the air that maybe these 3 elections would end the Ampel coalition, which it turns out it has now ended. It's broken. It's not to be fixed again. But I think the state elections only played like it was like the foreplay for the breaking up of that government. Maybe coming from the topics that played the most important role before the elections in all 3 states is going away from the Ukraine question is migration. And that goes actually back to the year 2015-16, where Germany took in a lot of migrants, and people have sensed that the so-called illegal migration is, or they think it's a threat to their wealth, their lives. Actually, we had some crime. Now I'm missing the word. A stabbing of a police officer, and just like
there were some incidents. There were
incidents that
crime incidents that made people very nervous about their own safety.
Yes, and the stabbing of a police officer was like 2 or 3 days before the elections in Saxony and Thuringia. So that was a big, that made, I think, made a difference too to the outcome and strengthened the AfD. And the Ampel parties did not enough for many months to actually build trust that they will solve the migration topic. They had to be pushed to that topic actually by AfD.
And I mean, obviously, we've talked about sort of how intertwined migration and concerns about crime are, and that was an important driver next to the war in Ukraine, and I think also the economy. And related to the economy and the economic situation, I'd like to come back to something that you said a little bit earlier. One of our viewers sort of picked up on this notion of the situation not being as bad as the sentiment. And in some of the work that we've been doing, I've often been talking about people's economic conditions, but then the perception of their economic condition, and that the political elite is sort of making it very easy by saying, oh, the situation is not as bad as you think, but still one has to take this perception into consideration. And the viewer who picked up on the notion of the situation not being as bad as the sentiment goes on to write that this seems like a global phenomenon at the moment, and wonders sort of how much this is just human psychology and how much it is sort of disenchantment or disenfranchisement with the status quo and an effort to disrupt the status quo. And that's why I thought what we were talking about earlier was really interesting, because it seemed to me that the voters were not just doing this out of protest, despite their frustration with the traffic light coalition, but really out of conviction that their votes were going for AfD and BSW. So how do you sort of reconcile this disenchantment with the status quo, disenchantment with the current federal government, a sense of disenfranchisement which has driven voters to the AfD and the BSW, with kind of the general political mood?
I think the general mood in Germany has been very much, I would say, it has the traffic light coalition has managed to bring the whole country into a bad mood. How did they do it? With a lot of conflict on open stage. Yeah. So I think maybe it was at first political conflicts that were just getting on people's nerves. That was like the first stage. But then we moved on, and the sentiment was, we have a government, we have this federal government in Berlin, and they do nothing but working against each other. And that set a tone of distrust also in politics, actually. People lost the sense that politicians are there to solve their problems. And this distrust, this sense of distrust led to, I would say, these really I'm taking up Brandenburg for the SPD, but CDU and SPD and Greens and liberals. The CDU is, of course, not part of the traffic light coalition, but it's the opposition in the federal government. But they were in conflicts also. People did not have a sense that anybody is solving their problems. Anybody's even taking care of their problems. And that is, I would say, that is the mood of, in Germany, things are not going well anymore. We had discussions about bridges just crashing, just the sense that it is not working anymore. The economy is slowing down. People are not already in a I would say bad economic situation. In the East, you have, for example, in Brandenburg, you have still unemployment rates at an all-time low because working force is needed everywhere. But they have a discouraging mood in the country. Which,
so that's a perfect segue to talk a little bit more at the federal level about what is happening. Many people looked at these elections in the East and were curious about the degree to which they might be a bellwether or a petri dish for the mood in the country as a whole, with a view to federal elections taking place in September of next year. Those elections have now moved forward in terms of the timeline that we can expect after the traffic light coalition collapsed on November 6th. It looks as though there will be a vote of confidence or no confidence on December 16th, and that new elections would take place on February 23rd. And so those elections have moved forward. A number of analysts said that the elections in Eastern Germany are sort of typical of the East and don't necessarily tell us very much about what would happen in national elections. But from your vantage point, it seems as if the disenchantment might be greater in parts of the East because people feel left behind. But there are certainly parts of the West where the alternative for Germany, the AfD, is doing fairly well. What's your sense of what might happen in the next few weeks, and specifically what might happen on February 23rd? It looks as though all three parties in the traffic light coalition will not do as well as they did last time around. But let's go a little deeper than that.
Yes, I would expect that too. Maybe we can look at the alternative for Germany, the AfD, at first. The AfD is not only an Eastern problem, as it's sometimes analysts say it's only the East voting for AfD. No. The AfD has been, in the latest numbers I have seen, the AfD was in the polls, do you say? Yeah, the AfD is currently actually polling at 19% for the upcoming Bundestags federal election. And that is like 9% more than in 2021. And it's now the second strongest party behind CDU. So here you can see maybe what we saw in the elections in the three Eastern states was a stronger, a more focused on the AfD, but it will, the blue ones, the AfD has the blue color. We have heard a lot, we will have our blue wonder. It's, I don't know if it's an English saying, but in Germany you say
a blue wave.
a blue wave, a blue surprise, a blue, we will. Yeah, and what we have seen is also, of course, that the strong numbers for the AfD in the three Eastern states have strengthened the AfD in Germany and as a whole, and also they have turned out in the three states to be even more extremist. The more extreme positions have gained them voters, and I think this is what we have to expect, that the AfD will try to sharpen their profile even more and move farther right still.
Yeah, I mean, I think
February.
if one thinks back to the last federal elections in 2021, the AfD came in with just over 10% of the vote. I remember people at the time talking about, that being sort of not something that needed to be taken seriously. The left party came in at just about, I guess, 5%, and people would say, see, in the extremes, the far left, the far right, you only have about 15% of the voters. Over 80% has voted for the center. That center now seems to be crumbling, right? In terms of what the polls are telling us. It looks highly likely that the next government will be led by the Christian Democrats. I think the big question is, what sort of a coalition will they then have? Obviously, it's going to come down to the numbers. But do you think that the Christian Democrats, who up to now have been able to say, we will not partner with the AfD, will be able to continue to say that?
Yes, I'm very sure they will continue to say that. That is, I would say, common ground for all the democratic parties in Germany. They will not coalition with the AfD. I would have a small faint question mark for the future there with BSW, if they stay away from the AfD. This is, I would say, the biggest fear. Also to go a little back to the three Eastern countries, if we have new elections in one of these countries, because they will not be able to, or if they're not able to form a government, then the fear is with the new election, there will be even stronger votes for AfD and BSW, and they will maybe come together then. So this is what nobody in the democratic spectrum wants. For the Bundestag election, federal election, the coalition, well, it's hard to tell. The SPD is deciding like today or tomorrow or latest on Monday who will be their candidate for the chancellor, and they are fighting about it. Olaf Scholz or Boris Pistorius. If it turns out to be Olaf Scholz again, I would say it will be hard for SPD to like turn the picture around and tell people vote for him for the second time, and he's doing it. He will be doing it better next time. It was only the traffic light coalition that was preventing Olaf Scholz from bringing Germany forward. That will be a hard thing to do. The Greens, to take a look at the Greens have lost a lot of ground in the three Eastern states, and I think that's something we will see in the whole of Germany. Also, Robert Habeck is there, the candidate for chancellor already. People have a lot of, or there was a lot of discomfort with him in the economic policies in the last month, also with energy questions and environment topics. So I think the Greens will not be as strong, and the Liberals will also lose to AfD and BSW.
Yeah, I mean, there are big questions as to whether the Liberals, the Free Democrats, will even make it over the 5% hurdle in federal elections, whether they'll even be represented in the next Bundestag. And obviously, as you described, there's now this big debate raging behind the scenes, but also front and center when it comes to the chancellor candidate of the Social Democrats. I've heard different reports. Some have indicated that the party leadership is convinced they're not going to do well, so they might as well move forward with Olaf Scholz as the Kanzlerkandidat. And then after the election, someone else would step in, whether it's Boris Pistorius or someone else. Let me just ask one final question as we come to a close, or actually, one final question, and that is, one of our viewers points out that refusing to form a government with the AfD is only proving to help their popularity. So, at what point did the other parties change their position, or do you see a scenario where other parties would be forced to work with the AfD?
Actually, I do not see a scenario, not on the state level and not on the federal level. As I said before, taking out BSW because they are, I wouldn't, up to now, they also say AfD is a no-go also to us. We will not talk to them, and we will not negotiate with them a coalition. We will not work with them together. I don't actually, I cannot imagine that will change on these two levels. If you go farther down, we have the AfD has spread all over into the smallest towns and villages already, and there people are forced already to, of course, talk with AfD. And if you have now I'm missing the word, I'm sorry. In small towns, the small parliaments there, they have
this town hall, the
town
city
halls,
council,
yeah,
the
city councils, of course, they are already working, or have to if the AfD is the strongest party in the city hall, what are you supposed to do? You have to work with them. So, but I can actually not imagine that on a state level we will see that. We will have maybe 3 or 4 party coalitions against AfD to work it out.
And I think those larger coalitions will probably be very difficult to manage, as we've seen at the federal level, and is likely to be the case at the state level. Well, German politics is very exciting at the moment, coming off of these elections in the East and the collapse of the Ampelkoalition in Berlin. There's a lot to watch in the weeks and months ahead. And so, Sabine Schicketanz, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us today about what's going on in Eastern Germany, but also putting that in the context of what's going on nationally as well. Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.